Good afternoon, and welcome to the Session 6 of the 2020 Virtual Kentucky K12 Technical Summit. On track 2 at this time, we have a discussion about Azure Security Administration and Stale Account Cleanup. We have with us today Drew Kirkman from Campbell County and Zachary Morris-Dean from Carroll County. During this discussion, please feel free to bring up any comment or question during the live chat. We have Tommy Burns in the chat that will be able to field those questions for us. He's the EdTech leader and CIO in Lawrence County. And also use the hashtag Kentucky Techs to include any type of information you hear and you would like to share on Twitter today. We also want you to be aware of an exit survey at the very end, that the link will be provided that you can receive PD and ELA hour certificates according to your districts. So that link and that survey will be at the end of the session. Now on to our team. Thank you guys for being here today. Please give us a brief introduction from each of you and take it away.
Thanks, Courtney. My name is Drew Kirkman. I am the LAN administrator for Campbell County Schools in Northern Kentucky. I've been working in school districts since 2012. I spent 4 years in Henry County, and I joined Campbell County in 2017. And before that, I was a school-based tech back in Owensboro in Western Kentucky, where I'm from. I specialize a lot in everything, but lately I do a lot of PowerShell and database work with dealing with Active Directory and getting accounts to and from where they need to go. So I think today is going to be a great opportunity for you to learn from us. Zach and I both do a lot of work in Active Directory, and we try to keep it as clean as possible. So we're just thankful for this opportunity to share our knowledge with you today. Zach?
I'm Zachary Morris-Dean. I'm the network administrator at Carroll County Schools up in the sticks of Northern Kentucky. This is my 11th year in K12. I spent 4 years as a school tech and then district technician at Owensboro Independent. Same from Drew. We've known each other for a long time, like 20 years. Anyway, I moved to Carroll County in 2012. Took over the role of network administrator, and since then we've done a lot of work. We've done a lot of great things. We're one-to-one K through 12 beginning next school year. God help us. And so we are. It's just a lot of stuff to do, but I enjoy every minute of it. So. Without further ado, I guess I'll go ahead and start with our outline here. So we're talking today about Active Directory, Azure, and Office 365, and kind of how all of that works. And if you, I did a session last year that I used this slideshow, and if you'll bear with me for just a moment, hopefully, Drew, can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I talked about Active Directory and kind of how life is post divestiture. And most people know this, but just a quick refresher, just in case we don't. There's 4 pieces to this Active Directory puzzle. The first one being the on-premise Active Directory that we've had forever and ever. And then we have an on-premise Exchange server that is, for all intents and purposes, on-premise, but it's in the cloud, but it's on-premise. Just keep that. And then AAD Connect, Azure Active Directory Connect, which we'll briefly touch on, and then what we call the cloud, or Azure Active Directory, Office 365, Microsoft 365, Exchange Online. There's 4,000 words for it, and then there it all is. So briefly to go over this, AD is what we've had since 2003. It works. It always works. It always has worked. And this is where we typically create our users, modify group membership, set users in the subset gal, which Drew will talk about here in a little bit. We'll jump through that. And then OET manages this. So as always, we've had questions. We contact OET. They wave their magic wand, Brandy and her crew, and then it just works. The on-premise, but not really, but yes, Exchange. This is where if you are an Office 365 district, you enable your remote mailboxes. Most of you have probably seen this before, or you baked it into your own scripts, or you use that pretty front end that Microsoft wrote for us. This is the best place to create your mail-enabled distribution lists, to maintain those. In my opinion, it is that you can do it other ways, but I prefer this. So this is where you would create those groups. You can access this via the web. There's a pretty front end that takes a little while to load because there's 100 million of our accounts. You can access this via PowerShell, which I highly recommend. And if you want to hide users from your tenant gal, this is where you would do that by hiding them, setting the hidden from address list enabled to true. And then to administer this, there's a security group in your AD called Disk Exchange Admins, and that's where you would do that. OET manages this as well. Brandy and her crew wave their magic wands, and it works well. Azure AD Connect, it just works. That's pretty much it. It lives on your D3 box. Just FYI, you will never have to do anything with it because Brandy and her crew, I say again, make it work. So we won't worry about that. However, I will say if you log into your Microsoft 365 admin portal, you will see the AAD Connect status. It's always a good idea to keep an eye on that just in case something breaks, or in case you see you've created an account and it's not there. Go check this first before you open a ticket to see if there's something wrong with Azure AD Connect. And then to the cloud, Office 365 uses Azure Active Directory as its user directory. So whereas before, if you remember way back in the day, when I was in high school, we had the Exchange box that was in the district, and we had Active Directory that was in the district, and all those kind of work together. Now in the cloud, we have Azure Active Directory and then Exchange in the cloud. And so you create your modern groups here. Teams, which we've all gotten to know and love here lately, live exclusively in the cloud. The short usernames don't exist. The users are addressed by their email address in our case, their user principal name. And you can connect this to other platforms, which most of us are doing currently with Infinite Campus. A lot of us have done with Clever. Many of us have done with G Suite. And then Intune is available there, which is not in the scope of this project today. And if you have questions about in Office or in Azure itself, you would contact Microsoft with a ticket, and they will take care of that. So that's a kind of a brief overview of the puzzle pieces that make this work. There's a couple things with on-premises AD that we will talk about just real briefly with security best practices. It's always a good idea. One thing that we implemented in Carroll County about 4 years ago were separate admin accounts. And so now we have in my particular case, I have my ZR Morris Dean staff user account that has normal staff rights. And then I have an account called SuperZac that is the support admin. Drew's is much more formal. His is called drew.admin. But so name it whatever you want, it doesn't matter. But it's always best to have a separate account that is kind of has the realm or has the control, so that way if your account were compromised for some reason, you wouldn't notice that all your servers have been crypto lockered. So that's always a good idea to have a separate admin account in local AD. And if you have automated processes, it's always good to have a service account that has just the amount of rights and no more for that particular process. So like my backups run with a service account called Veeam. I use Veeam as my backup solution. Veeam has an admin account that can do certain things, and that's it. So anyway, about that. Stale accounts. Drew will be sharing a GitHub repository later today. I don't know why I stopped presenting. But let's see. Everyone say hi to the CIO, Cindy Johan. Sorry. It's at home. Sorry about that. he has shared a repository that part of this is the stale user search. And this is, we've heard a lot lately about stale user accounts and making sure that stale users are managed, because if you have users out there that have passwords that could easily be cracked, that's not good. You know, your system is as secure as its weakest link. And so when someone is gone, you definitely want to deprovision their account. You want to revoke their rights. And you want to make sure that people have just the rights that they need. So if you, and he'll share this later on in the presentation, but you'll be able to, you can use this to search for inactive accounts in your domain on your local Active Directory server, which you'll notice here, this PowerShell, I may have to make my screen a little larger, but this particular one is looking for accounts that are not used in the last 90 days. Now, there's a couple things to remember here. One, this is only your local AD. So if you have bus drivers that only get into their email through Gmail or Office 365, and they've never logged onto a computer, they are going to look stale that they're not. So you have to be cognizant of that. You can't just run this at the top of your domain and just let it go wild. Otherwise, you'll have a lot of broken glass. Other things to remember, you may have service accounts, or in my case, we had a large iPad deployment up until a few years ago. And those iPads did not, those iPads had their own mailboxes because they had Apple IDs attached to them, and the passwords were secure, but they were never used. And so you would not want to disable those as well. So things to keep in mind about that, but it is good to keep an eye on stale accounts. You definitely don't want those hanging out there. And just remember that if they're only cloud-based users, you will get some false positives. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Drew, and he has some great information about password changes.
Absolutely. Thanks, Zach. I have some stuff over here on another computer that I'll present very shortly, but I'll go back to that same that same GitHub repository that I'll share later. Also has a script in here that I've found very, very useful, not only just for visibility into what's happening on your network, but say you have someone whose email account or other credential has been compromised. And so Office 365 will do this fun little thing where if an account is compromised and it starts sending out a bunch of spam email, because that's all the attackers really want, is just untarnished mailboxes that have never sent spam before to start sending spam, because they'll get through the filters on the other side. So Office 365 will put a stop to that. If there is X number of messages sent within a certain time period, it will lock down that mailbox and keep it from being able to send anything outside your district, which is a really valuable thing to have that setting on by default. That will help prevent a lot of damage from happening from a compromised account. So the way you respond to this is you force a password change for this user. And then once they change their password, you can unlock their account to allow them to send email outside your district again. The problem is you're counting on this person to tell you that they've changed their password or when they've changed their password. If they change their password same day, but they don't tell you until a week later, there's a whole week there where they're not going to be able to send any email outside of your district because they never told you that they changed their password. I have a script here that I will share that can change that. So in that GitHub repository, there is a script called password change notification. And I will present here. So just bear with me for just a second. There is a script that will scan your local Active Directory for users who have changed their password within a specified interval. So you'll want to set this up on like a Windows server. or other Windows machine within your network that has the Active Directory PowerShell module installed. Just about everything we share today is going to require that. And on the README for each of these scripts that we've put together, there is a short little set of instructions to allow you to get that installed. It's really easy. It just changes depending on which version of Windows you're running. So I linked to a page that will tell you depending on what you have. So if you run this script as a scheduled task every 10 minutes or so, and it will look 10 minutes into the past for any users that have changed their password. Every Active Directory account has an attribute on it called password last changed. And this attribute is updated when a user changes their password from a Windows machine. It even updates if a user uses the password write back function from Office 365. Whenever that password is updated on your local directory, it will generate a new timestamp for that. So for example, if you it will find every user that's changed their password in the last 10 minutes and send you an email, which is great because now you don't have to worry about whether or not this person who had a compromised email account has actually changed their password. You don't have to wait for them, and then you can go ahead and get them unlocked whenever they actually change it, instead of having to do this whole back and forth. And I will show an example of what this email looks like. And I did it earlier today, and let's see. So I'll share this slide here. This is the email it looks like. So I have a student account that I use for testing, and I changed its password today, and not 10 minutes later, I get this email from a service account. I just have it send from our global admin account. Each district should have one. And it just says the following users have changed their password in the last 10 minutes. And so if you have, if you need any sort of visibility into when a password is changed, this script will help you immensely. It's great to have that, especially when you're onboarding new people. What we do is we give new people a temporary password and force them to change it. And so this is always great to know when they actually do that. So that script is going to be in the GitHub repository that we talk about later on. There's also a script that searches for stale computers in your local directory. And so while I bring that up, stale computers are also, it can be hard, especially when you have laptops out in the classrooms. Teachers don't use them, students don't use them. They sit in a drawer for 6 to 8 months, and then all of a sudden somebody tries to pull it out and use it, and it's so far behind on updates, and it just can't, it doesn't really work all that well anymore. So I have a script here as well that will scan your Active Directory domain for stale computers. And it is, sorry, bear with me here. Once again, it uses that PowerShell module for Active Directory, but you can configure this to look back a certain number of days. So in my example here, the script in GitHub, I set it to look back 120 days or 4 months or so. Because if a computer is not even turned on for 4 months, it's less of a problem now because Windows updates are cumulative. But you remember back right before Windows 7 was retired, even a fresh install of Windows 7 with all the service packs, you turn it on and it immediately pulls down like 200 updates. And that's no way to go through life, in my opinion, if you really think about it, because it's gonna tie that computer up for an entire day. So what you want to do is, if this script will help you, if you have these computers that sit unused in a drawer in a classroom for 5 or 6 months, it's going to come back when they turn it back on and say this computer's account has been disabled. Or actually, newer versions of Windows, they'll say the security database does not have a computer trust relation. It's really cryptic, but you'll know what it means. So I run this script at 6 a.m. on the 1st of every month, and it'll go back 4 months and send me a report of what computers it has found and disabled, so that you really don't run the risk of having computers out there that may be X number of months behind on updates. It's a really useful tool, and I'm very excited to share it with everybody. And they're I can definitely crank these out all day, but we only have 45 minutes today, so so we'll leave it at that. But I'll make this available as well. Zach, do you want to talk about Azure AD?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's my camera. Sorry. Also, I wanted to tack on one thing about stale computers as well. Most of us have McAfee as our virus scanner and EPO, and if you can get those stale computers taken care of, your EPO will spend less time trying to identify those machines that just don't exist anymore, and trying to push a virus scanner out to them, trying to push updates to them. So it's just going to be in your best interest to clean up those stale machines. And I know that's just, no one wants to spend time doing that, but it does help the system as a whole. So enough about that. Let's talk about Azure AD. In Azure AD, we'll talk about some security best practices. The first one, I feel like I've said this every time that I've ever done a presentation, but it's still valid. Please do not make your regular daily driver account a global admin. It could have catastrophic consequences. If someone malicious got a hold of that account, your entire tenant could be gone. So whatever you do, just make sure that account is not a global administrator. It is a little, it's annoying sometimes having to open an incognito window or a different Chrome profile or the new Edge, which is just as good, by the way. You could, it is a little annoying, but the time that you spend is well worth it, I feel like, as an investment. And then another thing, and I will show my screen for this, if you'll bear with me for just a moment. Open a new incognito window and go to portal.azure.com. And let's get logged in quickly. I just changed that password yesterday and I remembered it today. I consider that a win. In here, it's also best to turn on multi-factor authentication. And I know that some of us are getting used to implementing multi-factor authentication. Of course, we don't have too much time today to talk about that, but it is a great idea to implement multi-factor authentication in our environments. I've configured mine to allow or to skip multi-factor authentication from my public IP addresses, as well as the public IP addresses that are registered for or that are allocated for KDE. So that way, if I have a user that goes to KDE, I won't have to worry about them being prompted for multi-factor authentication from there. And you can, if you have a lot of users that go between different districts, you can add them in as well. Some people think this is not a good idea, and that's perfectly fine. But I just chose to implement that here in my district. And then So that's how briefly how you would configure it. There is a very, very long document that Microsoft has, and if you want to fall asleep, you can go ahead and read that, and it will educate you on multi-factor authentication. If you'll give me just a moment, I will pull up a user here. Maybe not. To implement multi-factor authentication, it's a pretty easy process once you have searched for a user. One way you can do it is you can just simply click that user and enable. From what I understand, and this may have changed since the last time I looked into it, but to enforce multi-factor authentication for a security group, which is possible, you have to have Azure AD P2, which comes with the A5 licenses. So we don't have any A5 licenses in my tenant currently. We're exploring that for next year, but that is one option for doing that. Otherwise, you can just simply click on the user and click enable, and it will enable that multi-factor authentication for that specific user. So there's that. And Drew, I think Drew has some great information about conditional access.
I do, Zach. I'll bring up my other computer here and show a nice little window of my remote desktop connection to my management machine that I log into this this server with my separate account that is a member of just support admins, and I have everything management on that machine, and that serves two purposes. That keeps me from having to, or from being able to do administrative tasks from my daily driver account. Just like Zach said, it's important to do this in Azure AD and Office 365, and even earlier with your on-premises Active Directory. You don't really want to mix the two, because if for some reason or another, if your account gets compromised, you don't want that to be responsible for a lot of additional damage being done. So I'm going to go here to aad.portal.azure.com. And one thing that you might have noticed when Zach logged into his Super Zach account was that the background of his Azure or his Office 365 login screen changed. That is something that's a little outside of the scope of today's session, but that is a great security feature that you can implement in your Azure AD and Office 365 setup, because a phishing page. So if any of your users get a phishing email and it tries to recreate this Office 365 login page, they're not going to go to the effort to recreate everything about that login page. So for example, I have it set up to where if you hit an account that's on my Office 365 tenant, the background turns purple. And my users have been educated to know that if the background of the login page does not turn purple when they're logging into Office 365, they're not in the right place. So that's just a real quick thing that can help you. It's in your Office Admin Center settings under Azure AD. So that's just something that can help. So I'll use my password vault that contains this password that I do not know, and copy and paste it in here. And that lets me right in. So we're going to talk about conditional access. So conditional access is, Chuck Austin earlier was talking about how identity and who you are, what you have access to, and just framing it in that manner. Conditional access does not take the same framing. Instead of who you are determining what you have access to, but more like where you are. So, a good thing that a lot of districts have done with conditional access is limit where your users can sign in from. So for example, a lot of us don't leave the country very frequently. And it's even rarer that we leave the country and need to do any work, like we're leaving the country for work. That's just, working for public schools, you don't get a lot of international business travel. So, I mean, if you do, I envy you immensely. So with conditional access, you'll go here to the Azure AD portal and hit, you might have Azure Active Directory here in your sidebar. So once you load that up, it'll give you everything you could ever possibly want to control your Office 365 and Azure AD environment. And this is more geared toward the identity side of it. So your Exchange Online, you're not going to see a whole lot of that here. This is just going to be your cloud directory service. So what you can do is there is a security entry here in your sidebar. So you open that blade, this is what they're called, and there are settings here called conditional access. And so this is where you'll set up your rules for whether or not you allow a sign-in based on the user's location. So you can see I have a policy here that's called deny login outside of US or CATS. So if you don't have something like this, you'll click on new policy. But I'll kind of open mine and show you what the settings are to get this set up. So this is the way the conditions are set here. So the action on this policy is to block access. So the frame of mind that you want to have when you're setting up something like this is, since the action is a negative, your condition needs to match positive for that negative action to happen, which is 100% counterintuitive, but that's the way this works. You want to match the existence of conditions for denying access. So you have a users and groups section, and on here I have the main groups that I use. So I have you have your Office 365 staff license full security group that was created in the divestiture. I've created a couple more, and I think my laptop crashed, so that's great. But I think, yeah, it came back. So you have your Office 365 staff license full group. I've also created a staff A3 license group because we have some A3 licenses, and then student A3 licenses for those who want to have access to Minecraft Education Edition. And then I also have student license, no Skype for Business from the before times when it wasn't absolutely essential to have it for education. And so that the group's name is no longer in line with what it does. So, but we won't go into that right now. So you want this policy to apply to users in these groups. Now you can set it to all guests and external users if you want just to go really hard and be the most secure ever. Just beware of broken glass when you do that. So just to be the most safe, we're only applying it to those 4 groups. Your global admin accounts should have multi-factor enabled already. So that is going to be a big enough roadblock for most attackers when you're dealing with those accounts. But for most people, it's going to be a little unwieldy to set up multi-factor, especially going to all of them at once. So this will be a good in between. So you also want it to apply to all cloud apps. So this is your Azure AD portal, anything that throws you to Azure AD to sign in. So if you have your G Suite domain set to do SSO to Office 365, I think it also affects that. And Zach, you can correct me if this is the case, but anything that throws you to Azure AD is going to trip this policy.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then the conditions. This is where you you put in your conditions to deny access. And so, if you go back to what I said a few minutes ago, since the action is a negative, you want to exclude what you want to allow. So you learned in all your years of schooling that double negatives are something to avoid. Unfortunately, this is kind of how it works. So we'll look here in locations, and that's going to be what we mainly deal with here. Include any location. So this, it looks wrong, but it's correct, because we want this policy to act on any location and block access. But when you go over to the exclude side is where you'll see USA, which we'll go back and look at where you create that. And then if you use multi-factor authentication, you may already have a location called MFA trusted IPs. And then I've set up a location called KDE. Under client apps, you want to make sure all these boxes over here are checked, but uncheck the one that says apply policy only to supported platforms. Unchecking this box will also get it to apply to legacy protocols like IMAP and POP3 and SMTP, because a lot of compromised accounts, the attackers will go in that way because they historically have not been able to be subject to conditional access or multi-factor authentication. And that's an argument for disabling access to those platforms. And of course, you get your action, which is block access. You can also grant access and require multi-factor authentication, but that's going to be 100% up to you how you do this. I've just chosen to have the action to block access. So under the we go back to the security blade in Azure AD, and you saw where it had the locations called KDE and USA. That's here under this named locations blade here. So you can see I have these two locations created. You have multi-factor authentication, trusted IPs. So when you add a location, you can name it whatever you want. So USA is what I put in. But so I'll call this one USA2 just because I already have one called USA. So you can define it by an IP range or a country. So for example, if I wanted to allow people who are currently in Canada, for example, to log in. So say I've got a principal who's going on vacation in Winnipeg and needs to, I don't know, check their email the whole time. I'd tell them, why do you want to check your email the whole time? But so if you create it and call it Canada and set the country to, let's see, and then you hit create, and now you have a named location called Canada in your Azure AD tenant. So there is an issue with this, and I'm going to just take a second to talk about it before I throw it to Zach, because we're running out of time. On your USA named location, if you set this up, you need to check the box that says include unknown areas. And this reduces your security a little bit, but the trade-off is it's not going to block people who have IPv6 at home, because Microsoft, for some reason or another, cannot resolve an IPv6 address to a location. Now, a lot of home internet providers are giving out IPv6 addresses now. Most mobile carriers do it. And if you don't have this box checked that says include unknown areas, it will count any IPv6 address as unknown and block access. So just to go through this, if you set this up, you need to have it include unknown areas. So with that, I think we have some licensing things to talk about. So I'll throw it over to Zach.
Yes, before I start the licensing, I wanted to share something here. And Drew, let me know when my screen's visible. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So here, these are all sign-ins beginning at midnight on today, and I've taken out the student's name for privacy. These are all denied sign-ins from users in my tenant from midnight. Still scrolling. And if you look at the location, they're all outside the US. If you don't think people are logging in as your other users, or at least attempting to, they are, because our email addresses are on the internet and they can find it. And so it's very important to turn on conditional access and test it, definitely test it before you roll it out domain wide. But I can't stress the importance of conditional access. We have 2 minutes that I will quickly go over this, which, by the way, I know Drew didn't get to about the sign-in events. In your Azure AD portal, once you go to Azure AD, there's under monitoring, there's sign-ins. This is where you can kind of crawl through your sign-ins. This is actually where I'm showing you this. So take some time and scroll through there. You're not going to break anything by clicking around in here, so go for it. Let's talk about licensing very quickly. On your, and the only reason I bring this up is that now that we are in this post-COVID-19 world, or I guess we're still in it, a lot of people are using Teams. And so you'll want to make sure that under your, hopefully your A1 or A3 or A5 licenses, that under licensed groups, where this is where you've assigned your licenses to the groups, make sure that you have Teams turned on. And when you log into the, why doesn't it ever remember that? When you log into the Microsoft 365 panel, you will, more than likely, you'll see something that pops up here if you don't have Teams turned on that says, hey, you need to turn Teams on. So if you ever have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to Drew or myself. We are always happy to help. And I have 45 seconds left. There we go. I didn't think we'd make it.
All right. So here's the moment that you've all waited for. I have a slide here that will show the link to the PowerShell scripts that we're sharing today, and it is right here. It is. I've included a nice QR code to help you scan it. You can point your phone at your screen if you can see that code. But it's github.com/Campbell-technology. If I make any other scripts available, you will. There's a good chance you'll find it there. And the repository name is ERATCKY-2020-Azure AD. Everything, all the scripts that we've shared today are right there for the taking. Just reach out to either one of us if you have any questions, and we'll help however we can.
That is awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing, Drew and Zach, and taking time to field questions and just share everything along with that information there at the end. So we will have that also recorded and applied. So if you want to take a picture of that, great. But all the resources will be with the video and all the links. we want